Why do children reject their parents? It is a question that bleeds. It is the primal wound of lineage, the quiet tragedy played out in millions of homes, a schism that feels so profoundly personal, so uniquely cruel to those who endure it. We see it as a failure, a breakdown of love, a modern malady of ingratitude. But you and I know this is a misdiagnosis. To understand this phenomenon, one must not look at the surface, at the slammed doors, the bitter words, the aching silence. One must look, as you have always insisted, into the deep grammar of the soul, into the very architecture of what it means to become a self. For the rejection of the parent by the child, when viewed from the proper depth, is not a tragedy of love's failure. It is, in fact, the brutal, necessary, and often sacred work of love's fulfillment. It is the first and most terrible act of individuation. Let us begin, then, not with the child, but with the parent. For no child is born onto a blank slate, a tabula rasa. A child is born into a psychic field, a pre-existing atmosphere thick with the ghosts of parental hopes, the specters of their fears, and, most potently, the immense leaden weight of their unlived lives. This, as you have so often argued, is the heaviest inheritance of all. The parent, who perhaps dreamed of being an artist, but became an accountant, or yearned for a life of travel, but was bound by duty, does not simply store that unlived life away in a dusty attic of memory. No, that potent, unfulfilled energy seeks a vessel. It seeks expression. And what more perfect vessel is there than the new, unformed life of their own child? Without a word being spoken, the psychic demand is made. The child is tasked, unconsciously, with redeeming the parent's lost potential.
The son must achieve the worldly success the father was denied. The daughter must embody the freedom and rebellion the mother secretly craved. The child becomes a canvas upon which the parent paints the masterpiece they never could. For a time, this fusion can feel like love, like profound connection. The child, eager to please, eager for the warmth of parental approval, may even embrace this projected destiny. They become the good child, the gifted one, the responsible one, not because it is their nature, but because it is the role assigned to them in the family drama.
But the self, that irrepressible central archetype of wholeness, will not be denied forever. It stirs. It whispers of its own unique destiny, its own singular path. And in the crucible of adolescence, or sometimes much later, that whisper becomes a roar. The rejection, the sudden and violent casting off of the parent's values, dreams, and expectations, is not an act of malice. It is an act of psychic survival. It is the soul gasping for air, fighting to break free from the suffocating chrysalis of the parent's unlived life. The child is not rejecting the parent. They are rejecting the unbearable burden of living two lives at once, their own and the ghostly second life of the parent. The vehemence of the rejection is directly proportional to the weight of the projection. The more the parent is unconsciously demanded, the more ferociously the child must rebel to save themselves. This, of course, brings us to the very heart of your life's work, the process of individuation. We, in our modern rationalist poverty, have forgotten that the journey to adulthood is not a smooth, linear progression. It is a perilous quest, an alchemical work filled with necessary descents, with periods of darkness and dissolution. The first and most formidable dragon that the hero on this quest must slay is the parental imago. Not the actual physical parents, but the internalized, archetypal figures of the mother and father that dominate the child's inner world. In early life, this fusion is essential. The child exists in a state of participation mystique with the parents. Their world is the parents' world. Their thoughts are echoes of the parents' thoughts. Their gods are the parents themselves. The parents are the source of all nourishment, all safety, all meaning. They are, in effect, divine. But no one can become an individual while worshipping external gods. To find the God within, the external gods must fall. Rejection is this act of decided, The adolescent who suddenly sees their once all-knowing father as a fallible, foolish old man, or their once nurturing mother as a manipulative, controlling force, is not merely being cynical. They are performing a necessary act of psychic iconoclasm. They must shatter the idealized, divine image of the parent in order to differentiate their own ego from the all-encompassing parental complex. It is a messy, brutal, and painful process for all involved. The parent experiences it as a profound betrayal, a fall from grace. The child experiences it as a confusing, guilt-ridden, yet exhilarating declaration of independence. They are, in essence, saying, "I am not you. Your world is not my world. Your life is not my life." This is the primordial no, from which the individual I is born. We have lost the cultural containers for this process. Ancient societies had rites of passage, brutal initiations that would ritually sever the child from the mother and the home, and symbolically kill their childhood self so that their adult self could be born. They would be cast into the wilderness, forced to confront fear and pain, to prove they could survive without the parental container. We have replaced these profound rituals with the driver's license and the high school prom. We offer no map for this journey into the wilderness of the self, and so the child is forced to improvise. The rejection of the parent becomes their self-made, chaotic, and deeply misunderstood rite of passage. They create the wilderness in the living room. They become the monster in the initiation myth to force the separation that their soul demands. This process is complicated further by another of your fundamental insights, the persona. The parent not only projects their unlived life, they also actively shape the child's persona, the social mask, the acceptable face they present to the world. It is the good student, the polite daughter, the athletic son. This persona is a tool necessary for navigating the social world, but for the parent, it is often more than that. It is a reflection of their own success, their own values. The child's persona becomes an extension of the family's persona. The rebellion, then, is also a rebellion against this mask. The child who suddenly starts dressing in black, listening to discordant music, and espousing radical beliefs is not just trying to annoy their parents. They are trying to tear off a mask that feels false, a mask that is suffocating their authentic, emerging self. They are experimenting with new faces, new identities, trying to find one that fits their inner reality rather than the parent's external expectations. This can be terrifying for the parent because they mistake the mask for the person. They see the rejection of the persona as a rejection of all that is good and wholesome, a descent into chaos and self-destruction. They fail to see that it is often the opposite, a desperate search for authenticity. The child is willing to embrace a negative identity, the delinquent, the failure, the black sheep, rather than continue to live with a positive identity that feels like a lie. This aligns, of course, with your fundamental critique of a society that overvalues the persona and starves the self. The child's rejection is a raw, instinctive cry for wholeness in a world that pressures them toward fragmentation. They are attempting to unite their inner world with their outer presentation, and the first casualty of that effort is often the pristine, parent-approved persona. And here we must descend into even darker, more complex territory, the shadow. As you have so powerfully demonstrated, everything that we are unconscious of, everything we repress and deny within ourselves, does not simply vanish. It accumulates in the darkness, forming the shadow, the inferior, unwanted, and often primitive part of our personality. And the primary mechanism by which we deal with the shadow, especially in our youth, is projection. We see our own unacknowledged darkness in others. The child's rejection, therefore, is often a reaction to the parent's unacknowledged shadow. They are repulsed not by the parent, but by the hypocrisy they represent. But it is never so simple, is it? For the child is also developing their own shadow, their own capacity for anger, for sexuality, for rebellion, for cruelty, is beginning to stir. And because these energies are terrifying and unacceptable to their conscious ego, they do what we all do. They project them. And who is the closest, safest, and most powerful screen for this projection? The parent.
So a terrible, tangled dance begins. The child projects their own nascent, unacceptable shadow qualities onto the parent, and then attacks the parent for possessing them. The son who is struggling with his own aggression sees his father as a tyrant. The daughter who is awakening to her own sexuality sees her mother as a prude, or, conversely, as licentious. The flaw they despise in the parent is often the very quality they are terrified of discovering in themselves. The parent, in turn, is triggered by this. The child's projection strikes a nerve, activating the parent's own repressed shadow material. The parent reacts not as a conscious adult, but from their own wounded shadow side, and the conflict escalates into a seemingly inexplicable vortex of rage and misunderstanding. They are two shadows, wrestling in the dark, each convinced the other is the monster. Neither realizes they are fighting a mirror.
To untangle this requires an almost superhuman level of consciousness from the parent. It requires the parent to ask the most difficult question. Is the flaw my child sees in me, the accusation may level against me, perhaps a truth about myself that I have refused to see? It requires them to withdraw their own projections, to take responsibility for their own shadow, and to stop using their child as a screen. This is the great work. It is the parent's own, related, individuation journey. And it is the only thing that can truly liberate the child. This leads us to the final, and perhaps most profound stage of this process. The ultimate goal of this painful rejection is not permanent estrangement. It is the death of one kind of relationship in order to allow for the birth of another. The child must move from a relationship with the personal parent to a relationship with the archetypal parent. As you've said, the archetypes of the great mother and the great father are psychic realities, potent forces within the collective unconscious. In childhood, we project these immense numinous archetypes onto our small, personal, fallible parents. We make them into gods. Rejection is the process of reclaiming that projection. It is the dawning realization that my personal father is not the archetypal father. He is just a man, with flaws and strengths, doing his best. And my personal mother is not the great mother. She is just a woman, with her own wounds and her own story. This is a terrifying loss. It is the fall from Eden. It is the death of the childhood gods. But it is also a profound liberation. By killing the parent as God, the child can finally begin to internalize the archetypes. They can start to develop their own inner father, their own capacity for order, discipline, and reason. They can begin to cultivate their own inner mother, their own capacity for nurturing, creativity, and unconditional love. They are no longer dependent on the external, personal parent for these qualities. They are building them within themselves. This is the very definition of psychological maturity. And what happens then, if the process is successful? After the fire, after the storm, after the long, cold winter of rejection, the child returns. But they do not return as a child. They return as an equal. They return as a fellow adult, an individual who has fought their own battles and begun to map their own soul. They can now see their parents not as fallen gods, but as what they are, other people on the journey. They can see their flaws with compassion, not contempt. They can appreciate their strengths with gratitude, not dependence. The relationship is transformed from one of unconscious fusion and projection into one of conscious, mutual respect. This is the alchemical gold that can only be produced by the fire of rejection. The great challenge of our time is that we pathologize this process. We call it oppositional defiant disorder, or attachment failure, or simple teenage angst. We give it labels that imply sickness. We rush in with therapies and interventions designed to fix the relationship, to smooth things over, to force a premature reconciliation. We do this because we are terrified of the dark. We are terrified of the necessary descent. We want the resurrection without the crucifixion. As you have consistently warned, this is a grave error. By trying to fix the rejection, we interrupt the sacred work of individuation. We encourage the child to remain psychically bound to the parent, to never slay the dragon, to never find their own inner authority. We create a world of well-behaved, compliant, and psychically stunted adults who have never truly separated, who are still unconsciously living out their parents' unlived lives, still wearing a persona that is not their own, and still projecting their unexamined shadow onto the world. The true task of the parent, then, the most profound act of love, is not to prevent the rejection. It is to survive it. It is to hold the space for the child's necessary rebellion, to endure their rage and their contempt without collapsing and without retaliating from their own shadow. It is to understand that the child's no to them is a yes to the self. It requires the parent to have a strong enough connection to their own center, their own individuated self, that they are not destroyed when their child's psychic umbilical cord is so violently severed. This is the ultimate paradox. The parent, who has done their own inner work, who has faced their own shadow and integrated their own unlived life, is the one who gives their child the freedom to reject them. And in doing so, they give the child the greatest possible gift, the chance to become whole. The rejection, then, is not the end of the story. It is the climax of the second act. It is the dark night of the soul that precedes the dawn of a new, more authentic form of connection, one forged not in the unconscious fusion of dependency, but in the conscious light of two separate, sovereign individuals choosing to relate to one another in freedom and in truth. What we are witnessing in this painful family drama is not a failure. It is the soul's oldest and most holy war, the war for its own existence.
It is a testament to the indomitable power of the life force itself, which pushes every one of us, kicking and screaming, out of the comfortable room of the family and onto the lonely, terrifying, and magnificent path toward becoming who we truly are.
Let us therefore reframe our understanding. The child who pushes you away is not your enemy. They are a soul in the agony of birth, and the pain you feel is not the pain of being rejected. It is the pain of having given life so successfully that it now demands to live on its own terms. It is the sacred pain of letting go. If this exploration of the soul's deep and often painful grammar has resonated with you, I urge you to continue this dialogue, not with me, but with yourself. Reflect on the journey of your own individuation, on the parents you had to reject, and on the projections you may now be casting. The great work is never finished. It simply awaits our conscious participation.